What if the most dangerous military operation never actually happened? But every piece of it could have. What if instead of bombs falling and armies clashing, a modern war was decided by silence, timing, and a handful of people moving through the dark? Tonight in this video, we're not talking about what the US did in Venezuela. We're talking about what a US Special Forces infiltration would realistically look like if Washington ever decided that waiting was more dangerous than acting. For years, Venezuela exists in a strange gray zone of global politics. It is not officially at war with the United States, yet it has never truly been at peace either. Sanctions squeeze its economy like a slow vice. Intelligence agencies watch its leadership with quiet obsession, and its airspace, coastlines, and financial networks are monitored almost continuously. This is the kind of environment where a conventional invasion makes no sense, but covert action never disappears as an option. In modern warfare, the loudest move is often the least effective one. Precision beats spectacle, and silence beats shock and awe. The real battles happen long before anyone hears a single explosion. If US Special Forces were ever tasked with infiltrating Venezuela, the operation would not begin with boots on the ground. It would begin months earlier, quietly, inside windowless rooms filled with screens and analysts. Patterns matter more than firepower. Who travels where at what time, and with which security detail? Which buildings are used repeatedly, and which are decoys meant to distract attention? Which security units rotate regularly, and which ones never seem to change? Every leader, no matter how paranoid, leaves habits behind. Those habits become vulnerabilities. Intelligence officers would map not just locations, but routines, relationships, and moments of weakness that only appear when people believe they are safe. This phase would be slow and deeply unglamorous. Analysts would spend endless hours staring at satellite feeds, intercepted phone calls, radio chatter, and financial transactions that seem meaningless until patterns begin to emerge. Human intelligence fills in gaps. Technology cannot. Drivers talk when they feel ignored. Guards complain when they feel underpaid. Staff members grow careless when routines become boring. Information leaks not because systems fail, but because people do. Special operations succeed not because operators are superhuman, but because someone somewhere made a small mistake weeks or months earlier and never realized it mattered. Once the picture becomes clear, planners would begin rehearsing. Not metaphorically, literally. The US military has a long history of building full-scale replicas of target sites, sometimes in remote deserts or hidden training facilities. Walls are measured down to the inch. Staircases are memorized step by step. Entry points are practiced until movement becomes instinctive rather than conscious. This is muscle memory, not bravery. When stress spikes, thinking slows down. Training replaces thought. That is how elite units survive missions where hesitation kills, and improvisation gets people buried. The insertion itself would never look dramatic in the way movies portray it. No massive armada announcing its presence. No speeches. No warning shots fired into the air. Special operations rely on timing so precise that resistance barely has time to exist. Electronic warfare would likely begin first, quietly disrupting communications, blinding radar systems, and isolating the target area from the rest of the country. Think of it like cutting the power before a burglary. No alarms trigger, no calls go through, no coordination among defenders. Confusion spreads before anyone understands why. Aircraft would enter Venezuelan airspace only when detection windows are already closed. Stealth is not invisibility, it is timing. Helicopters would fly low, hugging terrain, using hills, buildings, and darkness to mask their approach. Pilots from units like the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment trained specifically for this kind of flight, where altitude, speed, and night vision turn geography into protection. The aircraft are loud, but only when you already know they are there. By the time most people hear them, the mission is already unfolding. On the ground, operators move fast and decisively. There is no prolonged firefight in this kind of mission because lingering creates exposure. Speed replaces force. Confusion replaces dominance. The objective is not to defeat everyone in the area, but to get in, control the target, and get out before the system understands what just happened. This is surgical violence, not battlefield warfare. Every second saved reduces the chance of escalation. Every unnecessary action increases the risk of the entire mission collapsing. If resistance occurs, it is dealt with immediately and locally. No pursuit, no cleanup beyond what is absolutely necessary. Special forces are trained to avoid emotional decision-making because emotion slows judgment. The mission is the mission. Anything that does not directly support it is ignored. This is why such operations feel cold when described afterward. There is no triumph, no celebration, no dramatic pause, just movement, control, extraction, and silence once it is over. Extraction would be the most dangerous moment of the entire operation. Once the objective is secured, the clock becomes the enemy. Reinforcements, militias, and loyalist forces, everything that was slow to respond now begins to converge. Aircraft return on tight schedules, sometimes under fire, sometimes under total radio silence. Pilots fly knowing there is no margin for error. The goal is not to win the area, but to leave it before the wider system wakes up. Success is measured in distance gained, not ground held. If such an operation ever occurred, the aftermath would be louder than the raid itself. Diplomatic fallout would explode within hours. Allies would demand explanations behind closed doors. Rivals would accuse violations of sovereignty on public stages. Legal scholars would argue over international law in endless panels and editorials. Media narratives would fracture instantly. Some would call it decisive. Others would call it reckless. The operation itself would already be over, but the consequences would only be beginning. This is the paradox of modern special operations. Tactically, they are small and almost invisible, sometimes involving fewer people than a restaurant staff on a slow night. Strategically, they are enormous, because their impact ripples far beyond the point of contact. A handful of people can reshape entire regions, not because of what they destroy, but because of what their actions signal to allies and enemies watching closely. Power today is not about occupation or flags planted in the ground. It is about demonstrating reach, about showing that distance, borders, and defenses are no longer guarantees of safety, only temporary obstacles. It is also why such operations are rare. The cost is not paid only in lives or equipment, but in legitimacy and credibility on the world stage. Once a nation crosses certain lines, it cannot uncross them or pretend the moment never happened. Every future action is judged against that precedent, whether leaders want it to be or not. That is why governments hesitate, debate, delay, and often choose restraint, not because they cannot act, but because acting changes the rules forever and forces the world to respond in ways no one can fully control. So when people ask whether the United States has infiltrated Venezuela with special forces, the honest answer is simpler and more unsettling than rumors suggest. There is no public evidence of a direct capture raid, no official confirmation of boots moving through Caracas at night, but the capability exists, the planning frameworks exist, the doctrine exists, and the world we live in increasingly rewards speed, secrecy, and precision over armies, speeches, and formal declarations made for cameras. That is what makes scenarios like this feel believable. Not because they happened, but because they fit the logic of modern power and modern conflict. Wars today are quieter, often invisible until the consequences surface. They are shorter, more ambiguous, and harder to define with clear beginnings and endings. They do not end with surrender ceremonies or victory parades. They end with press conferences, sanctions, denials, and unanswered questions that linger for years. And perhaps that is the most uncomfortable part. In the 21st century, the most important battles are not the ones fought in public or remembered in textbooks. They are the ones fought in shadows, through signals, timing, and decisions made behind closed doors. They are the ones you only learn about after they're already over, if you ever learn about them at all. If you want more deep dives that break down how power actually works behind the headlines without the myths, without the hype, then make sure you like and subscribe, because the real world is often stranger, quieter, and more dangerous than fiction ever admits.